The sharp snap of a wine glass being set on porcelain echoed in my ears louder than the dozen voices talking around me. Laughter.
Gossip. Clinks.
I sat on the furthest chair at the end of the reunion banquet table, the one no one wanted to claim. I wasn't supposed to be here. I'd only come because Grandpa had asked. And now I regretted it. She's just a waitress, my brother Neil said loud enough for the entire table to hear. His voice was filled with that smug, tight-lipped arrogance I remembered too well. Why does she even need a seat with us? Someone snickered. I didn't know who. Maybe it was Aunt Miranda. Or maybe it was that third cousin I hadn't seen in 8 years who wore pearls like she was drowning in them. I didn't look up. I focused on the salad in front of me, untouched. I'd worn the nicest thing I owned, a soft cream blouse, my one good pair of jeans, and a pair of polished flats. But it didn't matter. Nothing I wore, said, or did could make me acceptable in their eyes. I worked at a downtown diner, poured coffee for lawyers in the morning, and cleaned ketchup off booths at night. But that wasn't the shameful part to them. The shame, according to my mother's cold glances, was that I'd chosen not to do better. Not to marry up. Not to chase some fancy degree, or take a loan to fake a life I didn't want. I was happy being grounded real. But real doesn't impress people who live in curated perfection. I forced a smile and tried to cut my chicken. My hand trembled slightly, not from weakness, but from the weight of every sneer, every eye roll, every time someone shifted their chair a few inches farther from mine. "Why are you even here, Claire?" Neil's fiancée asked, her voice sickly sweet. "Aren't you always too busy working night shifts to come to these family things?" I looked up at her. Blonde, glowy, dressed in designer chiffon. I recognized her. She'd come into the diner once. Left a $1 tip on a $48 bill. I said nothing back then. "I came because Grandpa invited me," I said calmly. My voice didn't shake, but I could feel my jaw tightening. I wasn't going to come. My mother sighed and pretended to fix the place settings. "You shouldn't have. This is a family celebration." "I am family," I said, my voice softer now, almost childlike. "Barely," Neil muttered, leaning back. "You're like the mascot, someone we all tolerate for comic relief." My ears burned. I blinked hard, refusing to let them see the glassiness forming.
"I wouldn't give them that."
Then, just as I was about to excuse myself and leave, I heard it. The distant sound of tires crunching against gravel. Then silence. Then a collective gasp. Chairs scraped. Heads turned. The buzz of conversation halted like someone had hit mute. A black Rolls-Royce Phantom slowly rolled into view through the tall glass doors of the venue. My brother's fiancée clutched his arm. "Whose car is that?" The driver's door opened, and a sharply dressed man stepped out. 6'2", tan, wearing a dark blue suit that looked custom-made to fit a body sculpted by purpose, not vanity. The kind of man people turned to look at, not because he demanded attention but because he owned it. He walked toward the hall. And he was smiling. "Claire," he said when he reached the entrance. His voice was smooth, deep, and warm. His eyes scanned the table until they landed on me, and in that moment, the room may as well have disappeared. Everyone stared. "Claire," my mom whispered. The man stepped forward, his tone effortlessly confident. "Sorry I'm late, baby. Traffic was worse than I expected." And then he did the unthinkable. He leaned down and kissed my hand. Tender, respectful, intimate, familiar. The room froze. Who is he?" someone stammered. I stood up slowly, locking eyes with Neil. "He's my husband," I said softly. Gasps rippled like waves through the room. But what none of them saw coming, what none of them could have imagined, was why I'd kept him a secret all this time. The silence in the banquet hall stretched, so long it felt like time had stopped. No one moved. No one even breathed. Neil's fiancée blinked at me like her brain had blue-screened. My mother's jaw tensed so tightly I thought it might snap off. Aunt Miranda nearly dropped her wine glass. Meanwhile, I stood there, still in my simple blouse and jeans, holding hands with a man who looked like he'd stepped straight out of Forbes. My husband turned to the room and smiled politely, but his eyes never left me. Claire, he said gently, do you want to stay here, or should we head out? I took a deep breath. I think I'm done here, I said quietly. I picked up my purse. For the first time that evening, I walked tall. My spine straightened. My steps didn't falter. The shame that had hung over me like fog was gone. But just as we turned toward the exit, my grandfather stood up. Wait, he said firmly, his voice cutting through the tension like a knife through silk. Everyone turned. Even I froze. Grandpa slowly walked around the table, ignoring the stares. You all want to know who this man is? He asked. You want to know how Claire, the waitress, has a husband who makes more in a day than most of you see in a year? I wanted to stop him. I didn't want this to turn into a scene. But he wasn't done. I knew, Grandpa said. I've known all along. He placed a hand on my shoulder, gently. Claire didn't tell anyone because she didn't want the attention. She didn't want your fake smiles or your forced respect. She wanted love, not approval. Murmurs broke out like firecrackers around the room. She married for kindness, he added, not for money. She married someone who sees her heart, something most of you haven't even tried to see. I saw my father shift uncomfortably. My mother's mouth pressed into a hard line.
But Neil?
Neil looked pale. This is insane, he mumbled. She's lying. She has to be. My husband stepped forward.
Calm.
Controlled. Unapologetic. I'm Ethan Hart, he said. Every head turned. Now there was recognition. The name had landed like a thunderclap. Hart Enterprises. Real estate. Tech luxury development. The man was a billionaire, and not the spoiled, handed-down kind. He'd built it. Quietly. Privately. Ethan looked directly at Neil. Claire saved my life. What? Neil scoffed. I was having a panic attack, Ethan said, voice steady. It was late. I was alone, corner booth at that diner she worked at. Everyone else ignored me. She didn't. She sat with me. She stayed until I could breathe again. He turned back to me, his voice gentler now. And she didn't recognize me. She didn't care who I was. She just cared that I was okay. My heart clenched. I hadn't expected him to share that here. That moment had always been just ours. Ethan continued. I knew that night she was different. A woman who listens when no one else does. Who sees people. He turned to the room, now full of wide eyes and pin-drop silence. So, yeah, she's a waitress. And she's also the kindest, smartest, strongest person I've ever met. I couldn't hold it in any longer. My eyes welled up. Not because I was hurt, but because for the first time in my life, I was being seen the way I'd always wanted to be. Without labels. Without shame. Just as me. My mother stepped forward then, her voice shaking. Claire, why didn't you tell us? I looked at her with no malice, just a calm honesty. Because it shouldn't have taken a billionaire walking through those doors for you to treat me like I mattered. She flinched just barely. I never stopped being your daughter, I whispered. Even when you acted like I was an embarrassment. I turned to leave again. This time no one stopped me. Not even Grandpa. Because they all knew there was nothing left to say. But what came next in my life with Ethan was far more complicated than any of them could imagine. The door of the banquet hall clicked shut behind us, but I could still feel their eyes on my back. I didn't look back. Not once. Ethan guided me to the car silently. His hand was warm around mine, steady, like always. The moment the door closed and the soft hum of the engine replaced the whispers and stares, I exhaled. It was the first real breath I'd taken all night. He glanced at me. You okay? I nodded, swallowing back the lump in my throat. Yeah, I didn't expect you to come. He smirked, eyes softening. I told you, I wouldn't let you face them alone. I looked out the window as the trees zipped by. You always show up when I least expect it. He reached for my hand again. And always when it matters. For the next few minutes, we drove in silence, the kind that doesn't feel awkward, just full. Full of unspoken things. Memories. Emotions. And a strange, bittersweet peace. My phone buzzed. 6 missed calls. 14 texts. All from my mom, Neil, and a few others whose numbers I hadn't saved. I turned the screen off. I didn't need to read the messages. I already knew the tone. Sudden regret. Sudden curiosity. Sudden desperation. People always remember your worth when they realize someone valuable already saw it. We arrived at the townhouse Ethan had bought months ago. Quiet street, old brick charm. Tucked into the city, but far from the noise. He parked the car and looked at me carefully. You don't owe them anything, Claire. I know, I whispered. But part of me still wants them to. I don't know, apologize? Admit they were wrong. He leaned closer. You're human. It's okay to want that. But don't need it to heal. His words landed deep. Because I had been waiting. For years. For anyone in my family to just say they saw me. That they were proud. That I was enough. But all I'd gotten was silence or shame. Inside, I slipped out of my shoes and curled up on the couch. Ethan poured tea, the way he always did when he knew I needed grounding. Tell me something, he said as he handed me the mug. If today didn't happen, if that car never pulled up and they never knew who I was, would it have changed how you see yourself? I paused. The truth? No, I said. But it still hurts that I had to prove I'm not nothing before they finally paused long enough to blink. He nodded, his jaw tight. They didn't make you who you are. You did. I smiled faintly. That's not entirely true. They taught me what I didn't want to become. He laughed softly and brushed his fingers against my cheek. So now what? You want to go no contact? I sipped the tea. I don't know. Maybe. I need time to figure it out. He didn't push. He never did. Instead, he leaned back, pulled me into his arms, and said the thing that anchored me more than anything else. You were never just a waitress, Claire. You're my wife. You're my calm. You're everything I didn't know I needed until that night at the diner. I closed my eyes. That night. The night it all began. 2 years ago. The rain had been coming down in sheets. My shift was about to end, but a tall man in a damp coat slid into the corner booth 5 minutes before closing. He looked tired. Not the usual kind of tired, though. The kind that sat in his bones. I approached with a coffee pot. You okay, sir? No answer. Just a blank stare at the window, his breath shallow. Hey, I said, lowering my voice. You're having a panic attack, aren't you? His fingers twitched. His jaw clenched. He gave a tiny nod. I sat across from him, gently placing the mug down. Breathe with me. We sat there for 22 minutes. I didn't ask for money.
Didn't ask for a name.
Just helped him breathe until his hands stopped shaking. He left a $500 tip with a note. Thank you for seeing me. I didn't realize who he was until 2 weeks later when I saw his face on a magazine cover. By then, he had already returned to the diner, just to see me again. And now, he was my husband. And I was still that same girl who had nothing to prove, except to myself. 3 days passed. 3 days of silence from my family. Then the storm began. It started with a voicemail from my mother. Her tone was clipped, overly polite, like she was trying on kindness for the first time in years and didn't know if it fit. Claire, darling, I just want to talk. We were all a little shocked, that's all. I think it would be nice if we could catch up. Maybe dinner? Bring your husband. I didn't reply. Then Neil sent a long-winded text. No apology. Just a wall of words explaining how the reunion had taken a weird turn and how he hoped there were no hard feelings.
Right.
He'd called me comic relief. I ignored that too. But the message that finally got to me wasn't one I expected. It came from Grandpa. Handwritten. Delivered by courier. Claire, if I were 20 years younger, I'd have picked up the phone and given your brother a piece of my mind. But these days, my heart doesn't let me yell the way I used to. What happened at the reunion? I was ashamed. Not of you. Never of you.
Of them.
You've built something they could never understand because you built it from grace. From dignity. From nothing but your own strength. I'd love to see you. No pressure. Just lunch with your old grandpa. P.S. I always suspected your husband was someone important. The way he looked at you? That gave it away. I read the letter 5 times. Then I cried. Ethan came home from a meeting that afternoon and found me sitting at the kitchen counter with Grandpa's letter pressed to my chest. He didn't ask what was wrong, just walked over and pulled me into a hug. "I think I'm ready to see him," I whispered. We met Grandpa at his favorite little cafe, the kind that still served sandwiches on wax paper and used mismatched mugs for coffee. He sat in the corner booth, exactly where he always did, his cane propped beside him and his white hair combed back like he was expecting royalty. When he saw me, his eyes crinkled. "My girl," he said, opening his arms. I didn't hesitate. We hugged longer than necessary. But it wasn't enough to undo years. It was just enough to start. Ethan joined us, polite and quiet, letting Grandpa talk. We spoke about everything except the reunion. Grandpa asked Ethan about his work, about the places we'd traveled, about the night we met. He laughed at the story like he'd never heard it before, even though I was sure he'd replayed it in his head 100 times. But eventually, the subject circled back. "Claire," Grandpa said gently, "your mother wants to talk to you." I stiffened. Ethan's hand slid under the table and squeezed mine. "She says she made a mistake," Grandpa added. "Says she regrets things. She didn't say the word sorry, but I think she wants to." "Does she regret what she said, or that she said it out loud?" I asked. He didn't answer.
He didn't have to.
I sighed. "I'm not angry anymore. I'm just tired of proving myself." He nodded solemnly. "Then don't." Later that night, back at home, I found a message from my mom in my inbox.
It was different this time.
"Claire, I saw the interview. I saw how proud he is of you. How proud I should have been. I didn't know how to raise a daughter who didn't follow the path I expected. But I was wrong to judge you. I don't deserve your forgiveness right away. But I hope you'll let me earn it. Can we start over?" It hit harder than I wanted to admit. Because all I ever wanted was this. A moment of ownership. Not a performance. Not a facade. Ethan sat beside me and read the message over my shoulder. "What do you think?" he asked. I stared at the screen. "I think I want to meet her. Just me and her. No fancy dresses. No money talk. Just mother and daughter." "Are you sure?" he asked. "No," I said honestly. "But I want to try." The next day, I met my mother at the city garden near the Riverwalk. She stood there awkwardly by the fountain, clutching her purse like it was a shield. Her heels sank slightly into the grass. She looked smaller than I remembered. Or maybe I'd just grown in ways she never thought possible. When she saw me, she didn't smile immediately. Her eyes welled. "I don't know where to start," she said. "Don't start with excuses," I said gently. She nodded. "I won't. Just thank you for meeting me." We sat on a bench. The wind was gentle. The world kept moving around us, cars passing, kids laughing, birds chirping, and yet the two of us were still, suspended in something fragile. "I missed you," she finally said. "I missed who I thought you used to be," I replied. "But I'm willing to get to know who you are now, if you let me be who I am." She looked away, blinking fast. "Can I ask about him?" she asked. "Your husband." I smiled. "He's kind. He listens. He never once made me feel like I had to be someone else." "I envy you," she whispered. I didn't answer that. I just watched the fountain splash. Because for the first time, I didn't feel like the girl who didn't belong. I felt like someone finally building something that couldn't be taken away. A week later, I stood behind the diner counter again. Not because I had to, because I wanted to. The place that once smelled like fryer oil and spilled coffee now smelled like home. "Claire," a voice called out. I turned. It was Neil. In jeans, alone, no fancy fiancé in sight. Just him, holding a bouquet of supermarket flowers and looking more unsure than I'd ever seen him. I didn't speak first. "I came to say sorry," he muttered. "For what I said. For how I treated you." I raised an eyebrow. "Why now?" He hesitated. "Because you didn't change and you still turned out better than all of us." I looked at him for a moment, then nodded. "Thanks." We weren't healed, but it was a start. Outside, Ethan was waiting in the car. Ready? He asked. Not yet, I smiled. One more minute. I turned and looked back at the diner. My beginning. My anchor. And then I looked at Ethan. My now. My forever. They could whisper. They could doubt. But they'd never define me again. I had built my life from the ground up, and the best part? I stayed kind. I stayed real. And I stayed me.
Stranded on a dark road, a woman's chance encounter with a stranger leads to an unexpected gift. A mysterious device dropped by a drone. But the moment they touch it, they're thrown into a deadly game with no way out. Jason's eyes darted nervously between the clock on the dashboard and the empty road stretching out before him. The silence in the car was almost suffocating. It had been a long day, too long. His mind was full of the conversation he'd had earlier with his business partner, but his thoughts kept drifting back to his latest failure. There were things he should have done differently, opportunities he missed. The weight of it all hung over him, pressing down like a heavy fog. The engine hummed steadily beneath him, the rhythm comforting in its predictability. He didn't need to be going anywhere. He just needed space. Space to think, to breathe. Then he saw her, a woman, standing alone at the side of the road near an old gas station. She was pacing, looking down at her phone, frustration clear on her face. Jason instinctively slowed down, his curiosity piqued. He wasn't the type to stop for strangers, but something about her. Maybe it was the way she held herself, as though she didn't belong there, made him pull over without thinking twice. He stepped out of the car, the warm evening air surrounding him. The woman looked up as his boots crunched on the gravel, and for a second, their eyes met. There was a flicker of surprise in her gaze, but then it was quickly replaced with a forced smile. "Are you okay?" Jason asked, walking toward her. She let out a sigh. "I'm fine. Just stranded. My car broke down about 10 miles back. My phone's dead, and I haven't been able to get a signal." Jason took a moment, his mind racing. He wasn't a mechanic, but he knew enough to help someone in a bind. The urge to assist was instant, and before he could stop himself, he found himself offering, "I can give you a ride, take you to a mechanic, or wherever you need to go." The woman hesitated for just a beat, then nodded, relief flooding her face. "Thank you. I didn't know what I was going to do. I've been waiting for someone to stop for so long." Jason smiled, trying to reassure her. "No problem. Let's get you out of here." She climbed into the passenger seat of his car, and he got back in, pulling away from the station. The road was quiet, the kind of place where it felt like no one was watching. Jason glanced over at her. "You live around here?" She shook her head. "Not really. Just passing through, actually. I've been on the road for days trying to get back to my family." Jason gave a small nod, unsure of what else to say. His own life felt so complicated, and here she was, simple yet obviously troubled by something. It was strange how a random encounter could change the course of a day. And there was something about her, an unspoken tension that tugged at him. "I'm Nicole, by the way," she said, breaking the silence. "Thank you again. I don't know what I would have done without your help." "Jason," he replied, turning onto a smaller, less traveled road. "It's no trouble." But as they continued driving, Jason's thoughts kept drifting. There was something off. He didn't know why, but everything about this situation felt strange. Not her, just the whole setup. Something told him this wasn't a simple case of a broken-down car and a chance encounter. His instincts kicked in. Something was wrong. They reached her car, and he stopped a few feet away, parking next to the sedan. The dim glow from the headlights illuminated the area, but there was something unsettling about the silence around them. Jason stepped out, grabbing his toolkit from the trunk. As he approached the engine, he began to look for the issue. The car seemed fine at first, but the more he worked, the more his unease grew. It wasn't just a broken belt or a faulty battery. There was something more to it, but he didn't say anything. He didn't want to alarm her. "I'll have you on your way in a minute," he said, his voice steady but his mind racing. Nicole stayed in the car, her eyes watching him closely. He could feel her gaze on his back, but he didn't turn around. The odd feeling only intensified. That was when he heard it. A faint sound, barely noticeable at first. A hum. Jason froze, slowly standing up straight. He looked around, searching the darkness. The sound was coming from above. He saw it then. A small drone hovering overhead. It was too high to be anything ordinary, too precise in its movements. Jason's heart skipped a beat as the drone dropped something from its mechanical grip. It landed with a soft thud near the edge of the car. A small package wrapped in brown paper. Jason's instincts screamed at him to move, but he was rooted to the spot. What the hell was this? Nicole's voice broke through his shock. "What is that?" she asked, her voice filled with dread. "I don't know," Jason muttered. He walked toward the package, kneeling down to inspect it. It wasn't large, but it was solid, heavy for its size. He slowly reached out, his hands trembling as he unwrapped the paper. Inside, he found a small device, mechanical, with blinking lights. It looked like something straight out of a spy movie. His pulse raced as he held it in his hands. This wasn't a random gift. He glanced up at Nicole, who was now standing outside the car, her face pale with shock. "Did you have something to do with this?" he demanded, his voice harsh, the weight of the situation pressing on him. Nicole shook her head, her eyes wide with confusion. "I don't know what that is. I swear." Jason stood up, backing away from her, the device still in his hands. "Then why the hell was it dropped here? Why me?" Nicole's voice faltered. Jason, I really don't know. But whatever it is, it's dangerous. We need to get out of here now." Jason's mind raced. It felt like the ground was slipping away beneath him. Who sent this? Why him? And why now? The night had taken a turn Jason wasn't ready for, and whatever was coming next, he was already in too deep. Jason couldn't shake the feeling that he had just stepped into something much bigger than himself. The device in his hands, this strange mechanical object, was no accident. Someone had deliberately dropped it near them. And someone, somewhere, was watching. Nicole's voice was small but insistent. "Jason, we need to get rid of it. Now. Before what?" Jason wasn't sure. But the panic in her eyes was real, and it made his blood run cold. He had to think fast. He glanced at the device in his hands, its blinking lights casting eerie shadows in the dark. There were no markings, no labels. It looked like something out of a high-tech spy thriller. But this wasn't a movie, and Jason wasn't some action hero. He was just a guy who had stopped to help a stranger on a lonely highway. "All right," Jason said, his voice strained. "Let's get back to the car. We'll figure this out." But as he started to turn, he heard the unmistakable sound of a vehicle approaching. His head snapped up. The low hum of an engine was getting louder, and the headlights of a car soon cut through the darkness, bright against the night. "Shit," Jason muttered under his breath. He shoved the device into his jacket pocket, trying to act casual, though every part of him screamed to run. He could feel Nicole's eyes on him, her uncertainty matching his own. The car came to a stop just behind them. Jason's heart pounded as the headlights illuminated the area around them. The figure who stepped out of the car wasn't someone he recognized. He was tall, with a cold, calculating look in his eyes. His movements were deliberate, too smooth to be accidental. He wore a suit, sharp, tailored, and in his hands, he held something that made Jason's blood freeze. A gun. Nicole's breath caught in her throat, and Jason instinctively stepped in front of her, his hand resting on the side of the car. He didn't know what was happening, but his instincts were screaming that this was bad. Very bad. The man took a few steps toward them, his face impassive. "You have something that doesn't belong to you," he said, his voice low and menacing. Jason didn't answer, trying to keep his voice steady. "Who are you?" The man didn't flinch. "It doesn't matter who I am. What matters is what you've got. And I suggest you hand it over before things get ugly." Nicole's eyes flicked nervously between Jason and the man. "Jason," she whispered, "we need to leave. This is bigger than us." Jason's mind raced. He wasn't a hero. He didn't know how to fight this. He was just trying to survive. And now, whatever game was being played, he had unknowingly walked right into the middle of it. The man with the gun took another step forward. "I'll ask you once more. Give me the device and I'll let you both walk away. If not, well, things won't go so smoothly. Jason's grip tightened on the side of the car, his heart thudding in his chest. He had no choice. There was no way he was handing over whatever the hell this was. He had to think, and fast. He took a deep breath and turned to Nicole. Get in the car, he muttered under his breath. Nicole looked at him with wide eyes, hesitating for only a second before nodding. Without a word, she slid into the car, locking the door behind her. Jason followed suit, slamming the door shut just as the man took another step forward. Jason's mind was racing. He started the engine, his foot pressing down on the gas pedal. The car shot forward, tires screeching against the gravel. He didn't care where they were going, just that they had to get away. Behind them, the sound of the man's voice echoed in the distance. You can't outrun this, he called, but Jason didn't slow down. The road ahead was dark, and Jason's headlights cut through the blackness. The adrenaline coursed through his veins as he gripped the wheel tighter. His thoughts were a blur, but one thing was clear. Whoever those men were, they weren't going to stop. Where are we going? Nicole asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jason's gaze flicked over to her. I don't know, he admitted, but we need to get off the road. They'll be looking for us. For the next few minutes, they drove in silence, the tension between them almost suffocating. Jason's hands were clammy on the wheel, his knuckles white. Every turn, every corner seemed like it could lead to something worse. He had no plan, no backup. Just two people trying to outrun whatever was coming for them. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Jason spotted a small, run-down motel up ahead. He pulled into the parking lot, his heart racing as he cut the engine. We need to stay low, he said urgently, glancing around the parking lot. Stay in the car. I'll check in and get a room. Nicole nodded silently, her face pale, her eyes still wide with fear. Jason didn't blame her. He felt the same way. Jason got out of the car, his legs shaky as he walked into the motel lobby. The man behind the counter barely looked up as Jason approached. Got a room for the night? Jason asked, trying to sound casual, though his voice betrayed his nerves. The man nodded, handing him a key. Room 12. Stay safe, stranger. Jason took the key, nodding absent-mindedly. He didn't know why, but something about the clerk's nonchalant attitude made Jason feel like they were being watched. He quickly returned to the car and started driving toward the back of the motel. Room 12 was the furthest away from the main office, a perfect place to stay hidden. The moment they pulled into the spot, Jason's eyes scanned the area. He didn't feel safe, but for now it was the best they had. He turned to Nicole, his expression grim. We need to lay low for a while. I don't know who those guys are, but they're not going to give up. Nicole's eyes were full of fear, but they were also full of something else. Determination. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. We'll figure this out, she said, her voice more confident than before. Whatever's happening, we're in it together. Jason nodded, but the feeling of dread never left. There was something bigger going on, something he couldn't understand yet. But it was clear whoever was behind this was watching them, and it wouldn't be long before they came looking again. Jason paced the small motel room, his mind racing in 1,000 directions. He could hear Nicole's quiet breathing from across the room, but his own heartbeats felt deafening, pounding in his ears. He couldn't shake the image of that man in the suit with the gun. The last words he'd heard from the man echoed in his mind. You can't outrun this. He pulled his phone out of his pocket, his hands trembling as he stared at the screen. No missed calls, no messages. He had no idea who to contact, no one he could trust. He'd helped a stranger, and now they were both in a mess bigger than they could handle. The sound of Nicole shifting on the bed snapped him from his thoughts. She was sitting with her legs crossed, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. Her eyes were distant, like she was somewhere far away. She was trying to make sense of everything, just like he was. We're not safe here, Jason muttered under his breath, pacing back and forth. Nicole's voice interrupted him, softer than before. Jason, do you think they know who we are? I mean, why us? Jason stopped pacing and looked at her. She was staring at him now, her eyes filled with concern, but also something else. Something deeper. Fear, yes, but also a quiet strength. He couldn't help but admire her resilience. I don't know, Jason admitted, running a hand through his hair. But I think whoever dropped that package, they're not just watching us. They know something about me. About you too. Nicole's gaze flickered with a mix of confusion and suspicion. What do you mean, about me? Jason wasn't sure he could explain it. There was something about the way she looked at the device, something in her reaction that didn't sit right with him. She seemed too calm, too accepting, when most people would have been terrified out of their minds. But he pushed the thought aside. It was probably just the stress talking. Whatever's going on, Jason said, shaking his head. It's not random. They're not done with us. They're just getting started. He walked over to the small, chipped table in the corner of the room and sat down, staring at the device wrapped in the brown paper. It sat on the table, still with its blinking lights, as if it were waiting for something. Waiting for him to figure it out. Nicole walked over slowly, her bare feet silent on the worn carpet. She reached for the device, but Jason's hand shot out to stop her. Don't touch it, he said, his voice firm. I don't know what that thing is, and I don't know who's watching us. The last thing we need is to mess with something we don't understand. Nicole nodded, stepping back. You're right, but I don't want to be in the dark either. We need answers. Jason swallowed hard. He didn't know how to get answers. He didn't have a plan. But whatever was going on, he couldn't let Nicole get dragged deeper into it. He didn't know her, but somehow he felt protective of her, like he couldn't let anything happen to her. We need to get out of here, he said, standing up. This motel, it's not safe. If they're watching us, we can't stay in one place for too long. Nicole met his eyes. There was a flicker of understanding in her gaze. Where are we going? Jason didn't have an answer. All he knew was they had to move, and fast up by the time the sun began to rise, casting its weak light over the small motel parking lot. Jason and Nicole had packed up what little they had. Jason's mind was still working on overdrive, every thought running into the next. They couldn't trust anyone. They couldn't trust the authorities, and they certainly couldn't trust the people who were after them. Jason's car was the only one in the parking lot. He checked the rearview mirror, then the side mirrors. No sign of any black SUVs, no sign of the men who had chased them earlier. But Jason knew better than to let his guard down. Let's go, Jason said, his voice low but urgent. Nicole nodded and got into the passenger seat. Jason started the engine, and without saying a word, he pulled out of the parking lot, his eyes scanning the streets for any sign of danger. Where are we going? Nicole asked after a few minutes of silence. Jason didn't have a concrete plan. He only knew that they had to get as far away from the motel as possible. They couldn't stay on the highway, they needed to blend in. The city, the bright lights, the hustle and bustle, would be their best shot at disappearing. I think we need to head into the city, Jason said, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. Lay low, find somewhere safe. We can figure out what this is and why we're involved. Nicole didn't argue, though Jason could tell she was still processing everything. The events of the past few hours had happened too quickly, too intensely, for anyone to be ready. She had been calm, perhaps too calm, but Jason understood. She didn't want to seem weak. They were both in this together now. As they made their way toward the city, Jason's thoughts drifted back to the device in his jacket pocket. Every time he thought about it, his stomach churned. The blinking lights on that thing, the strange hum it emitted, it wasn't just some random gadget. It was a tool for something much larger than either of them. Suddenly, Jason's phone buzzed, breaking through the silence. His heart skipped as he glanced down at the screen. It was a text. No number, just a message. We know you have it. Don't try to run. Jason's grip tightened around the steering wheel. His worst fear had just been confirmed. They were being hunted. They weren't free. Nicole turned toward him, noticing his stiff posture. What is it? Jason's breath caught in his throat. They know. They know we have the device. Nicole's face went pale, and Jason could feel her pulse quicken. There was a brief moment of silence before she spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. "We need to get rid of it. Whatever this is, we can't keep it." Jason didn't disagree, but he knew there was no simple way out of this now. The people after them were too powerful, too organized. And now, with that message, there was no going back. Jason's mind raced as he navigated through the city's winding streets. The towering buildings loomed above them, but Jason wasn't looking at the cityscape. He was looking for an exit, looking for a way to disappear. They needed answers. They needed to understand why they were involved in whatever this was. The only thing Jason knew for sure was that whoever was behind this, they weren't going to let them go without a fight. He had no choice but to keep moving, and just when Jason thought they were getting a handle on things, when the fog in his mind began to lift for a brief moment, he heard it, a soft thud, followed by the sound of a drone buzzing overhead. The chase had begun again. The hum of the drone above them was unmistakable, sending a wave of panic through Jason's chest. His grip tightened on the steering wheel as he sped through the city streets, weaving between traffic with reckless urgency. The drone wasn't a coincidence. It wasn't just another random device. Someone was tracking them, watching their every move. Nicole's voice trembled from the passenger seat. "Jason, they're here. We can't outrun this." Jason's eyes darted to the rearview mirror, catching a glimpse of the drone as it hovered, unmoving. It was too precise, too intentional. He had never been more aware of how out of control his life had become. He had to think fast. "Stay down," he ordered, his voice sharp. He swerved to the right, taking an unexpected turn down a narrow alleyway. The drone followed. The adrenaline surged through his veins as he pushed the pedal harder, making the tires screech against the pavement. Nicole's fear was palpable. She gripped the door handle, but there was no escape. They were trapped, and the city's labyrinth of streets didn't seem to offer any real refuge. Jason's mind raced. He couldn't lead them straight into a dead end. He needed a place to hide, somewhere they could regroup and figure out their next move. A flash of recognition hit him. An old storage unit complex just up ahead. He had used it for some small-time business dealings years ago. He knew the place wasn't in use anymore. It might be their best chance. He slammed on the brakes just as they approached the entrance. The drone hovered over them, still keeping its distance, as if waiting for Jason's next move. "We're going in there," Jason said firmly, turning the wheel and making a sharp left into the complex. The rusted gates loomed ahead. With one final push, Jason sped through the opening and parked behind a large storage unit. Jason killed the engine, his heart pounding. Nicole didn't speak. She didn't need to. She could feel it too, the weight of the moment, the tension that had been building since that damn drone appeared. The silence in the car was suffocating, as if the world outside had gone on pause while they waited for whatever would come next. Jason turned to Nicole, his voice quiet but urgent. "We can't stay here for long. I don't know what that thing is or why they want it, but we're gonna have to make a decision." Nicole nodded, her eyes meeting his. She had been quiet ever since the chase began, but Jason could see that the fear she felt had shifted into something else. Resolve. She was ready for whatever came next. "I'm with you," she said softly, "but we need answers. We need to know what we're dealing with before we make any more moves." Jason took a deep breath. "I agree. Let's think this through. They want this device. But why?" Nicole hesitated for a moment before speaking. "Maybe it's not just about the device. Maybe it's about who has it." Jason stared at her, the pieces clicking together in his mind. "You're right," he muttered. "It's not the device. It's us. They're after us." Nicole's voice grew more determined. "Then we don't just give it to them. We fight. We figure out what they want and we take control of this." Jason could feel her words resonate within him. For the first time in hours, he felt something more than fear. He felt a spark of hope. The idea that they didn't have to be victims in this game. Maybe they could turn the tables. A sudden noise snapped him back to reality. It was faint at first, footsteps soft and deliberate. Jason's pulse spiked, and he instinctively grabbed the device from his pocket. He glanced at Nicole, whose eyes widened in realization. The footsteps were getting closer. "We need to move. Now," Jason said. Nicole didn't hesitate. They both slipped out of the car, making their way around the back of the storage units, staying low. Jason's mind raced as he led Nicole toward a small, unmarked door in the back of one of the units. "I know a place in here," Jason said, his voice steady despite the fear building inside him. "It's secure. If we're lucky, they won't find us." They pushed open the door, slipping inside into the darkness. The door creaked shut behind them, and Jason immediately began searching for a light switch. The space was empty, filled with old boxes and forgotten things. But in the corner, he found a small table with an assortment of tools and parts. It wasn't much, but it was enough to give him a moment of peace. Nicole walked to the far side of the room, her eyes scanning the shadows. Jason took a deep breath, trying to steady his thoughts. The steps outside were getting closer. He could hear voices now, men, whispering. Their words unintelligible but their presence unmistakable. He turned to Nicole. "We have to move again. They're getting too close." Nicole met his gaze, her expression hardening. "We can't keep running. They want us. We have to find out who they are and why they're after us." Jason nodded, his mind shifting gears. He had no idea what was going on, but he knew one thing. He couldn't keep running forever. "We need to fight back," Jason said, his voice quieter but determined. "We can't let them control this anymore." Just as he spoke, the sound of footsteps outside stopped. The door rattled. Jason's breath caught in his chest as he slowly turned toward the door. It creaked open. The man who stepped inside wasn't who Jason expected. He wasn't one of the suited figures from earlier, nor did he carry a weapon. His face was clean-shaven, and his eyes were calm, almost too calm. But there was a quiet authority in his movements. "I think it's time we talked," the man said, his voice steady. "You've been running long enough." Jason didn't move. "Who are you?" The man's lips twitched into a small smile. "The one who can answer your questions. But first, I need that device." Jason stood his ground. "You want it? You'll have to take it from me." The man didn't flinch. He took a step forward. "That's the idea." Jason stood frozen, his hands still gripping the device. The man who had entered the room didn't look like a typical threat, but Jason's instincts told him otherwise. The calm in his demeanor was unsettling, too controlled for someone who wasn't dangerous. The man's eyes met Jason's, as though assessing him, calculating his every move. Jason didn't flinch. He had no idea who this guy was, but he knew one thing. If they wanted the device, they weren't going to take it without a fight. "You're not getting it," Jason said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline pumping through his veins. He glanced at Nicole, who was standing by the door, her back pressed against the wall. She was tense, ready to move at a moment's notice. Jason felt a surge of protectiveness. Whatever was going on, he couldn't let them harm her. The man didn't respond right away. Instead, he took a slow step forward, his gaze never leaving Jason. "You're mistaken if you think that's the way this is going to go," the man said calmly. "You're out of your depth here." Jason's chest tightened. "I don't care. You want this thing so bad? You'll have to kill me for it." The man's lips twisted into a faint smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I don't want to kill you, Jason, but I'll do whatever it takes to get what I need. You're in my way." Jason's hand tightened around the device, and for a moment, everything seemed to freeze. The only sound was the pounding of his heart. The man took another step forward, but Jason didn't back down. His mind was racing, his thoughts in chaos. But the one thing that cut through the noise was the realization that he had no choice now. He couldn't let them take control of this. He couldn't let them control him. "I'm not afraid of you," Jason said, his voice firm. "You can threaten me all you want, but I'm not giving up this device. You don't know who you're dealing with." The man's eyes flickered, a slight shift in his expression. "You really think that's going to save you?" He raised his hand, signaling to someone outside. Jason felt a sharp pang of fear, but it didn't stop him from acting. Without thinking, he shoved the device into his jacket pocket and rushed toward the man. He was faster than the man expected, and before he could react, Jason knocked him to the ground, pinning him against the cold concrete floor. The man's breath was knocked out of him, But Jason didn't stop. Nicole's voice sliced through the chaos. Jason, wait. Jason hesitated for only a split second. But that was enough. The man's calm demeanor was gone, replaced by something far darker. He shoved Jason off of him, sending him sprawling across the floor. Not bad, the man said, his tone now filled with cold amusement. But it's too late for you. You should have just given me the device. Jason scrambled to his feet, his fists clenched. But before he could react, the door slammed open. The sound of footsteps, heavy and determined, flooded the room. Jason's heart sank. They weren't alone. A group of men stormed in, their presence almost suffocating. They wore tactical gear, their faces covered, their movements fluid and coordinated. There was no escaping now. They had him cornered. The man who had spoken earlier, who had been so calm, stood up slowly, brushing himself off. You had a chance to walk away. Now you've made a mistake. Jason stood motionless, the reality of their situation sinking in. His back was against the wall. There was no room to run. Nicole's voice broke through the tension. What do you want from us? The man's gaze flickered to her, then back to Jason. You've seen too much. Now we're going to take what we came for. Jason didn't move. He was outnumbered, and every part of him screamed that they needed to make a choice. The device, the reason they were after him, it was the key to something, but he didn't know what. What he did know was that he couldn't let these men win. He couldn't let them take control of his life any longer. In that moment, a flash of inspiration struck him. Something that would give them a chance to fight back. Jason reached into his pocket, pulling out the device, his hand shaking. The men froze, their eyes narrowing. Jason held it up, watching the blinking lights flicker faster as he pressed a hidden button on the side. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a soft whir, the device emitted a loud, high-pitched sound. The men staggered back, covering their ears. Their faces contorted in pain. The noise was unbearable. Jason didn't know if it was a warning or a weapon, but he didn't care. He turned to Nicole, his eyes wide with urgency. We need to go. Now. Nicole didn't hesitate. She grabbed Jason's arm, pulling him toward the door. The men were disoriented, their hands still pressed to their ears as they staggered away from the device's blinding light. They bolted for the exit, and Jason didn't look back. He didn't know if it would be enough. He didn't know if they were free. But as they ran, Jason's heart surged with something else, hope. For the first time, they weren't running because they were afraid. They were running because they were in control. They reached the parking lot, and Jason fumbled for the keys. His hands were still shaking, but he managed to start the car. Without a word, he sped off into the night. The city lights fading in the rearview mirror, Nicole was silent beside him, her expression intense but unreadable. Jason kept his eyes on the road, his thoughts swirling around everything that had happened. Where do we go from here? She asked, her voice calm but filled with something deeper. Understanding, Jason swallowed hard. I don't know, but I promise you one thing. We're not running anymore. We're gonna figure this out. And as they disappeared into the night, Jason felt the weight of everything shift. They weren't just surviving anymore. They were fighting back. The game had changed. The metallic clang of the gymnasium doors echoed through the vast, empty space, breaking the eerie silence. Harsh fluorescent lights flickered overhead as Elena blinked awake, disoriented and cold. The first thing she felt was the coarse rope digging into her wrists, tied tightly behind her back. Her legs were similarly bound, her ankles tethered to the base of a pole in the center of the room. Glitter clung to her skin, shimmering mockingly under the harsh lights. Laughter rang out. Look who finally decided to wake up. Marcy's voice was shrill with amusement. Her face twisted into a smug grin as she leaned casually against the bleachers. Behind her, Jake and a few others snickered, their phones held up, recording every humiliating moment. What the hell? Elena's voice cracked as she tugged against the restraints. Panic surged in her chest, but she bit it down, refusing to show fear. Untie me. Ah, don't be such a buzzkill, Jake taunted, dumping another handful of glitter over her head. It caught in her dark hair, sparkling like a cruel halo. You always act so high and mighty. Consider this a reality check. The group erupted into laughter again, the sound sharp and merciless. Marcy crouched in front of Elena, her smile sickly sweet. You've been acting like you're better than everyone lately. Ignoring us, walking around like you're some kind of royalty. Well, guess what? You're not. Elena glared up at her, fire blazing in her eyes despite her vulnerable position. So, this is what you do when someone doesn't play your games? Tie them up and humiliate them? Pathetic. Marcy's grin faltered for a split second before she recovered, standing abruptly. Keep talking, princess. Maybe we'll post this online. Let everyone see the real you. Elena's heart sank at the mention of social media. She could already imagine the captions. Little Miss Perfect isn't so perfect now. The thought of becoming a viral laughingstock made her stomach churn. But she refused to let them see her break. You think this makes you powerful? She said, her voice steady despite the tremble in her hands. It doesn't. It makes you cowards. Jake stepped forward, his face darkening. Say that again. Enough. Marcy cut him off, her tone sharper now. Let's wrap this up. We've made our point. But as they prepared to leave, the gym doors swung open with a bang. Elena? A deep, commanding voice rang out, freezing everyone in their tracks. The group turned in unison, their smug expressions replaced with wide-eyed fear. Standing in the doorway was a man in a tailored suit, his presence exuding authority and power. Behind him, 2 security guards flanked his sides, their stern faces promising swift consequences. Dad? Elena's voice was small, a mix of relief and disbelief. The man, Alexander Grayson, strode forward, his sharp gaze sweeping over the scene. He took in the ropes, the glitter, the mocking faces of the so-called friends, and his jaw tightened with barely contained fury. Untie her. Now. His voice was cold and deadly, each word slicing through the air like a blade. Marcy stammered, backing away. We were just... Now. Jake scrambled to comply, fumbling with the knots as the others stood frozen in shock. As soon as Elena was free, Alexander stepped forward, his hand gentle on her shoulder. Are you okay? He asked, his voice softening just for her. She nodded, though tears pricked at her eyes. Alexander straightened, turning back to the group. The softness vanished, replaced by an icy rage that sent shivers down their spines. You have no idea who you just messed with, he said, his voice low but filled with menace. The gym seemed to shrink under the weight of his words. Security will escort you out, he continued, motioning to the guards. And believe me when I say you will regret this. I'll make sure of it. The group was herded out, their protests and excuses falling on deaf ears. Marcy looked back once, her face pale and terrified, before disappearing through the doors. Elena sat there for a moment, her hands trembling as the adrenaline began to fade. Alexander knelt beside her, his expression softening again. Let's get you home. She nodded silently, leaning on him as they left the gym. But deep down, she knew this wasn't over, and neither did they. The news of what happened in the gymnasium spread like wildfire. By the next morning, the entire school was buzzing. Some were horrified, others curious, and a few, those who'd never liked Elena, were disappointed they hadn't been there to witness it themselves. Marcy and her friends didn't show up to school. Rumors swirled about expulsions, lawsuits, and the wrath of Alexander Grayson, the man who wasn't just Elena's father but one of the most powerful business tycoons in the city. Elena, however, didn't bask in the chaos. She kept her head down, determined to move forward, but the stares and whispers followed her everywhere. Did you hear? Her dad owns like half the companies in the state. No wonder Marcy's crew is screwed. I mean, what were they thinking? You don't mess with someone like her. Elena ignored them all, focusing on getting through her classes. But by lunch, she couldn't take it anymore. Retreating to the library, she sank into a corner chair, hoping for some peace. Hey! She looked up to see Caleb, a quiet boy from her English class. He wasn't someone she'd ever spoken to much, but his easygoing nature made him popular in his own way. What do you want? She asked, her tone sharper than intended. He held up his hands. Relax. I'm not here to gawk. Just thought you could use some company. Elena hesitated but eventually nodded. Caleb sat across from her, placing his tray on the table. So, he began, you're basically a superhero now. She frowned. What? Rich dad swooping in, saving the day. This kind of epic. Elena couldn't help the small laugh that escaped her. It didn't feel epic. Caleb smiled, but his expression grew serious. What they did was messed up. If you ever need someone to talk to, I'm around. Thanks, she said quietly, surprised by the sincerity in his voice. Meanwhile, Marcy's world was crumbling. Her parents had been furious when the school called, detailing the incident and the potential legal consequences. Alexander Grayson had pulled no punches, threatening to press charges unless she and her friends faced strict disciplinary action. Jake had already cracked, spilling everything to his parents in a desperate attempt to shift the blame. Marcy, however, was left to grapple with the fallout. She sat in her room, staring at her phone. Messages flooded in, some from people condemning her, others from fake friends trying to distance themselves. How did it come to this? She wondered, tears streaming down her face. For years, she'd been the queen bee, the one everyone wanted to be or be friends with. But now all of that felt hollow. And then there was Elena, the girl she'd tormented out of jealousy and insecurity, who had faced her humiliation with more grace and strength than Marcy could ever muster. Marcy hated herself for what she'd done, but she didn't know how to make it right. The days passed, and things began to shift. Elena, tired of the constant whispers and stares, decided to take control of the narrative. During a school assembly, she stepped onto the stage, her heart pounding in her chest. I know everyone here has heard what happened, she began, her voice steady. And I'm not here to relive it. But I want to say this, what Marcy and her friends did wasn't just about me. It was about a culture that lets people think it's okay to tear others down to feel powerful. The room was silent, every eye on her. I'm not perfect, she continued, but no one deserves to be humiliated like that. And if you've ever felt like you had to stay silent while someone else was being bullied, I'm telling you now, it's okay to speak up. It's okay to say no. Her words hung in the air, powerful and unyielding. Marcy, sitting in the back of the auditorium, felt a lump in her throat. For the first time in a long time, she saw Elena not as a rival, but as someone she wanted to be. The story of the gymnasium became a turning point for everyone involved. Elena found her voice, using her experience to advocate for change, while Marcy began a painful but necessary journey of self-reflection and redemption. By the end of the school year, the scars remained, but so did the lessons. For Elena, it wasn't just about surviving. It was about thriving, turning her pain into power. And for Marcy, it was about proving that even the worst mistakes could lead to something better. Because in the end, it wasn't just about what happened, it was about what came next. As the summer break approached, Elena found herself reflecting on everything that had happened. The chaos, the humiliation, the sudden attention. It all felt surreal. But through it all, something inside her had shifted. She was no longer the quiet girl who let the world pass her by. No longer the girl who hid in the shadows, afraid of the spotlight. When she looked into the mirror now, she saw someone different. Stronger, more confident. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was thriving. The months of media attention had made her something of a local figure. Invitations to speak at youth groups, anti-bullying campaigns, and even charity events flooded in. At first, Elena had been hesitant. The idea of standing in front of large crowds terrified her. But her father, Alexander, was always there, offering quiet encouragement and reminding her that the world needed to hear her story. One evening, as they sat together in the large living room of their home, Elena spoke her mind. Dad, I never asked for any of this. The spotlight, the attention. I just wanted to survive, to finish high school and go on with my life. But now, I feel like I have to do something bigger with all this. It feels like a chance to change things, but I don't know how. Alexander leaned forward, his eyes full of pride. You already are changing things, Elena, by being yourself. by standing up when everyone else was sitting down. You've given hope to others who might have felt helpless. But this is your story now. You write the next chapter. His words lingered with her as she continued her work with the anti-bullying campaign, finding herself more and more involved in organizing workshops and speaking out. Each event gave her a sense of purpose, of empowerment. Every speech she gave was an act of defiance against the girl who once felt invisible, helpless, and weak. But with every step forward, there was always a shadow from the past, lurking just beneath the surface. Across town, Marcy sat in the dim light of her bedroom, a photo album open in front of her. She ran her fingers over the images of her and her friends, smiling in happier times, before the fallout. Her parents had gone quiet after the incident, their faces etched with disappointment. They hadn't scolded her as harshly as some might expect, but their silence had cut deeper than any harsh words could. Her life, once filled with social events and constant attention, had come to a standstill. She couldn't even bear to look at her friends anymore, the ones who had once been her closest allies. Jake had tried to reach out, apologizing profusely, but Marcy had shut him down. Her shame was too great. She couldn't face the people who had participated in tearing down someone like Elena. And then there was the deep, gnawing regret. She knew she had been cruel, but it wasn't until the whole school had turned its eyes on her, until the weight of her actions had been made so public, that she realized the full extent of the damage she'd caused. She had hurt Elena, but more than that, she had hurt herself. Marcy's identity had always been wrapped up in her social standing, her ability to manipulate others into giving her power. But now that power was gone. Her mother's voice broke through her thoughts. "Marcy, there's someone here to see you." Marcy's heart skipped a beat. She wasn't expecting anyone. She stood hesitantly as the door creaked open, and there, standing in the doorway, was Elena. Marcy blinked, unsure if her mind was playing tricks on her. What are you doing here?" Elena took a step inside, her expression unreadable. "I wanted to talk. I know you probably didn't expect that." Marcy stood frozen for a moment, then motioned for Elena to sit. "I didn't think you'd want anything to do with me." Elena sat down slowly, her eyes never leaving Marcy's. "I don't know if I forgive you yet, but I've been thinking, and I realized that what happened, what you did, it wasn't just about me. It was about something bigger, something that needed to be addressed. Maybe it's time we both faced it." Marcy swallowed hard. "I can't even begin to apologize enough. I can't change what I did, and I don't even deserve forgiveness. I've been so selfish." Elena leaned forward slightly, her gaze softening. "You hurt me, Marcy, but you also hurt yourself. I think you know that. You lost something that was part of your identity, something that made you feel powerful. But you can rebuild yourself just like I did. I don't expect us to be friends, but I think it's important you understand that there's always a chance for change." Marcy's eyes welled with tears. "I don't know if I can ever make it right, but I'll try. I'll start with myself." Elena nodded, a slight smile tugging at her lips. "That's all anyone can do." As Elena stood to leave, Marcy called after her. "Wait." Elena paused, looking back. "You're stronger than I ever was. I hope you know that." Elena smiled, a real smile this time, the kind that radiated from the inside. "I think I do." By the end of the summer, the dynamics had shifted. Elena continued to speak out, her presence at school events a beacon for students who had felt voiceless. Her speeches, now filled with more personal reflection and calls for unity, resonated with everyone who had felt the sting of cruelty. Marcy, on the other hand, took a quieter approach to her redemption. She didn't seek out the spotlight. Instead, she focused on self-reflection, confronting her past actions and slowly rebuilding the trust of those she had hurt. Her relationship with Elena remained distant, but there was an unspoken understanding between them. They were no longer enemies. But for Elena, this wasn't about proving anyone wrong. It wasn't about getting revenge or seeing those who wronged her punished. It was about healing, growth, and using her voice to create change. She had been knocked down, humiliated, and broken. But now she was something else. Stronger, wiser, ready to face whatever the future held with the same resilience that had carried her through the worst moments of her life. In the end, the greatest lesson was clear. Sometimes the deepest pain leads to the greatest transformation. And for both Elena and Marcy, it was a lesson they would carry with them for the rest of their lives.